Okay, so let's look back at a little bit of history. This comes from Dr. Nelson, infectious disease book from 2005, and this comes out of a big institution in the United States. And in this textbook, we have a quote that says that the decline in mortality from infectious diseases during the 20th century stands as a tribute to advances in public health and safer lifestyles compared with that in previous centuries. And that's really what our book shows, is that these changes in society and lifestyles and improvements in nutrition had more to do with the decline in death and in many cases with incidence of diseases than anything else, including antibiotic invention, including vaccination. As proof, I'd like to show you some infectious diseases. This is the year 1900, this is the year 1935, and this is the year 1970. Let's look at how the death rate went down for these diseases. Influenza and pneumonia claimed 202 per 100,000 in 1900 in the United States. In 1935, before there was any vaccine whatsoever, we were down by half. And by 1970, before the vaccination programs were really up and running, we're down even further. The original vaccines for influenza in USA, if you look at the writing of a doctor named Dr. Anthony Morris, who worked at the Division of Biologic Sciences, which is now the National Institutes of Health. His job was to determine the safety of these vaccines. And he determined not only were they not safe in the 1970s, but they were no more effective than tap water. And he testified to this effect in front of the Senate, and he was definitely a qualified person to make that statement. Today, we are still offered these vaccines for influenza despite any real support for their effectiveness, despite any well-designed studies for their safety, and despite the fact that the most prestigious collaboration called the Cochrane Collaboration, who evaluates different aspects of medicine, is saying that the hype and the media information on influenza is completely out of proportion to the science. Okay, so let's look now at measles. We had 31 per 100,000 deaths in 1900, down to 2.7 long before the measles vaccine came in. And I'll show you in a minute that it was almost down to zero right before the vaccine came on the scene. Okay, so I always thought that tetanus was much more prevalent than it actually was, but it turns out that, look, you don't even find tetanus on most charts like this because it was such a low incidence disease. So we had 4 per 100,000 back in the time when all these other things were claiming people's lives. And then by 1935, before tetanus vaccines, we had 0.95. So let's move on here, and I'm going to show you some more graphs in a minute. But I also want to show you a quote from this article from 1980. And this doctor says that the death rate from tuberculosis, diphtheria, scarlet fever, all these other things started to fall long before the introduction of vaccinations or antibiotics. And that's exactly what Roman and I found when we did our research looking at vital statistics in parts of the world where they were available from the mid-1800s and onwards. This is another chart from our book, and it shows you the death rate in England and Wales from various diseases. Now, you can take pictures if you like. I'm happy for you to take pictures, but I'll tell you that if you go to dissolvingillusions.com, you can actually see all of the graphs that are in the book in color for free. You can also read the author's introduction, and you can read, I think it's the first page of every chapter. So let's look at measles. Okay? Measles is the green line. And you can see the death rate for measles was quite high, around 40 per 100,000. And then it started to decline around the time when food was improving, child labor laws were being instated, and when plumbers came on the scene and the sewage was separated from the drinking water. And look, here's when the measles vaccine came. Interesting, isn't it? It was almost down to 0. We have the exact numbers, but it's like 0.3 or something like that. Okay, here we have scarlet fever. Now, scarlet fever vaccines were developed, but they found that they really only gave them to healthcare workers sporadically, and that there were so many problems with these vaccines, allergic reactions, that they never really used them in mass production. But here we see a disease that, so we can say they really never vaccinated the masses for scarlet fever, but look, death rate for scarlet fever. And it was down here. A lot of people say, well, that's because we have antibiotics, Dr. Humphreys. But antibiotics were created here, down here, around the there were some not so great antibiotics in the late 1930s, late 1940s, and the early 1950s is when penicillin came. But you can see the death rate was down because the people were stronger. And that's really important, that the people being strong is much more important than the microbe being strong. Do you know that bubonic plague that used to take a quarter of the population and wiped out masses in Europe, do you know we still have that in USA? You don't hear about it because not a lot of people are dying from it. Okay, here we have whooping cough. And again, you see the same thing. Here's when whooping cough vaccine came in. So it's just silly to say that vaccination is responsible for the decline in death rate. Okay, so let's get back to tetanus, because we're often told that once we gave this vaccine, we saw this enormous drop in death and cases, and we're shown this graph here. And it really does look like, the tetanus vaccine came in around here, and look, we have this ski slope coming down. But the problem is, and this is how you'll be shown by the public health authorities, all the vaccines' success. They don't show you the whole graph. Here's what happens when you look at the whole graph. We can see that it was already coming down, and then it came down further. But look at how much more dramatic it was in England and Wales. We can see that the decline in incidence and mortality is here, and the vaccine came in here, and we actually see it come up a little bit after the vaccine came in. And this is the same thing in Canada. We see that the death rate from tetanus, they only started reporting cases here, but we can see the death rate was just precipitously falling. And this is the year the vaccines came in. And again, we see for some strange reason an increase right there, but we can't say that we have tetanus vaccines to thank, because the trend was already seriously coming down.